All right, welcome to the final installment of my 8650 Tech TED Talks. So this is the culminating activity. It is the summative course assignment. I am going to preface by saying that because there is quite a lot of information that was covered throughout the duration of this, it will be a little bit lengthy. So I just wanted to give a heads up. I'm not going to say any more because, like I said, it will take some time. So I just wanted to start with a brief overview. The first part of our assignment is to look at our personal philosophy. So, just as an overview, the four avenues as far as the purpose of my educational philosophy. First and foremost, it's to align and promote the school's mission and vision. We're going to be talking about that throughout the slides. And the second thing that was garnered is to encourage inclusion across all aspects of the school and the community as well. As far as teaching methods, some of the things that we're going to talk about, we'll begin with explicit outcomes. We're going to use a backwards design model. These are aligned with some of the curricular theories we've been presented. And finally, we're going to also, it's not necessarily a teaching method, but we want to include inclusive practices to ensure that all students have a voice and feel represented. As far as learning beliefs, all learners can benefit from inclusive practices, and we're going to talk a lot about the universal design for learning. I know that that was not the focal point, but I'm always looking for ways in which I can meet the needs of all learners while still focusing on a specific section. We're going to talk about how all students must be given and held to high expectations. And the final thing we're going to look at is our outlook for addressing challenges, things like being proactive and inclusive, ongoing, and being objective. We're going to focus more specifically of how these can be seen with the different curriculums and curricular theories that have been addressed throughout the course. So as an overview, we talked about different types of curriculums. This doesn't necessarily fall with my personal philosophy. These are some of the, well, it falls with my personal philosophy. These are some of the points that the readings in which we talked about, some of the big takeaways that I'll be talking more specifically about as the presentation continues. But just as an overview, looking at the scientific curriculum, and this is in no particular order, must begin with explicit outcomes, and we're going to align this with the backward design for leadership and instruction. A lot of these are the idea of Bobbitt. The formal curriculum, we want to also make sure we're adhering to our school's mission and vision, promoting the values identified while still using standardized instruction. A lot of us still have a specific curriculum that we wish to follow, but how can we use that curriculum to meet the needs of our specific school's vision? We want to promote critical thinking and employ a growth mindset. Again, the formal curriculum, we want to know it serves as a roadmap, but teachers and leaders still hold autonomy to meet student needs. Again, we're looking at these theories through leadership and teaching implications. While I know that the premise of this is to look at it through a leadership lens, I think it's still salient to look at it through a teacher lens as well, for two reasons. One, I'm still teaching, and number two, as a leader, we want to be able to meet the needs of our constituents, and thinking in terms of teachers is how we're going to do that. The third big takeaway was from the null curriculum. We want to maintain a focus on the formal curriculum, which is the driving force, but still looking at the null concepts. We can encourage real world connections, and we want to find the time to teach some of these implicit skills that are part of the null curriculum while still making sure we're implementing that formal curriculum. When looking at the enacted curriculum, we discovered that teachers have more autonomy than a lot of us initially thought over our curriculum. As a leadership implication, it's crucial that leadership works with the staff to guide these needed curricular adjustments, for example, following a data-based analysis protocol. And last but not least, of course, we talked about hidden curriculum. Some of the big takeaways from here are that we can use this to model our values and ideas that align again with that school's mission and vision. How are we going to push that mission and vision? One of the ways we can do that while still covering the formal curriculum is by touching upon things like values and the like with the hidden curriculum. Of course, we can impact learning in an inclusive environment, and we can also promote high expectations as well. Each of these is going to be discussed through how the implementation of this philosophy in my practice. So we will continue on with that. So when it comes to implementing a personal philosophy, the first lens that I looked at was through the formal curriculum. The reason that I started with this is because my district does expect a level of fidelity to the designated curriculums in which we have. That does not mean that we must be verbatim, but we still have specifics that we have to follow. And of course, we still have district mandated assessments that the students are held accountable to. So again, teachers still and leaders have the ability to have autonomy over the manner in which it's delivered. The instruction must be delivered. And again, we're promoting the school's mission and vision. We want to make sure everybody is on board. Just as an example, with the formal curriculum, I talked about this in the activity when we made our formal curriculum design. The ideas of cultural proficiency, creativity and critical thinking, a growth mindset, and outward service. Now, even though those might not be necessarily a standard in which the students are assessed, it is something that we can still put forth. And any types of adjustments, we can also look at adjusting our formal curriculum, things like gender and race inclusion, and teaching our null curriculum. So when looking at taking the scientific curricular approach or using the scientific curriculum, these are the ideas that were garnered from the works of Bobbitt and Cleavard. This was probably one of the biggest takeaways from my personal philosophy. It has been used throughout my district, but it really became prescient this last year when we were teaching remotely. And also I had moved up from third grade to fourth grade. So when looking at this from a long-term planning perspective, it really helped me to focus on the end goal. I'm going to look at this first off from long-term planning, and then I'll talk about how it can be used for more of a leadership perspective. So with long-term planning, of course, as Bobbitt stated, we always want to start with our explicit outcomes, and from there, we develop our assessments and learning experiences based upon that. We can also use the data, as I'll discuss in the next slide, to further drive the instruction, and we adjust our experiences. So in other words, we're reflecting upon our practice and we're adjusting. Not only does this hold true the scientific curricular approach to planning a specific lesson as indicated, but it can also be translated to other aspects. One thing specifically for the idea of data analysis is with the using the backwards design for this. I'm sorry, this is specific with our lesson planning. So again, I'm not going to read this exact example, but I'll just give a brief overview. So we look at the three key components: the desired outcome, the assessment measure, and the learning experiences. I just gave a specific example. So with the outcome, I want my students to be able to compare decimal numbers to the hundredths place. So how am I going to determine whether or not they know this? They're going to use a place value chart and represent each digit's value to show which decimal number is larger. From there, once I've determined what I want the students to do, how I'm going to determine if they know it or not, I can then begin to craft the learning experiences. Again, you can see these are just some examples of how I went from the concrete, representative, and abstract, along with including some measures for scaffolding. But these are all based upon the theories of Bobbitt, in which he begins by saying that we must start focusing on the explicit desired outcomes of our students. From there, I took some of the information from the ASCD and implemented their specific backwards design. But not only can this process, which takes root in the practice or the theories of Bobbitt, it can also be used from a more leadership overarching idea. So let's say we're looking at school-wide data. So again, we want to begin using the same backwards design profile. We're starting with our desired outcome. Well, if we're looking at school-wide data, let's say we're looking at what specific standards our students are not meeting. This can be a grade-wide, this can be school-wide, it could be a standard of mathematical practice, it could be a reading, let's just say determining main idea. There are desired outcomes in which we want to drive school improvement. From there, we create an assessment measure. How are we going to measure the whether or not the students have, once we've gone back over the information, how are we going to determine if they have begun to master this? And of course, from there, we would create the learning experiences. So as you can see, the process itself has not changed, but the ideas of Bobbitt can be looked at through both the teacher lens, and it can also provide leadership implications as well. Another key takeaway that I'm looking at for the personal philosophy was the ideas of Onion and Jackson within the hidden curriculum. We learned, of course, that the hidden curriculum is similar to the idea of an iceberg. About 10% of the iceberg is above the water. That's what we're actually, the formal curriculum and what we are expected to teach the students. Well, the 90% below the water, what we can't see, that's the idea of the hidden curriculum. We have the ability to be proactive. And again, you've heard me harp on this, pushing the school's mission and vision, both with leadership and teaching. We can take the idea of the hidden curriculum. How are we going to push our mission and vision and meet that upper 10% of the iceberg? Well, we're going to be proactive. We're going to build school-wide relationships, things like restorative practices. That's going to help us address the values, the actions, the things that we're not necessarily teaching like we are the formal curriculum, but are going to help our students meet their learning goals. It also gives us the ability to differentiate our learning experiences. Onion talked about the idea of different social classes and the way schools are constructed. Now, I understand that is not necessarily the case, especially working for an urban school system. There may be schools in which there are multiple social strata represented. So how are we going to do this? Well, by the theories of Onion with the idea of the hidden curriculum, schools must be preparing our learners from a variety of social backgrounds to meet 21st century needs. So what are the styles, intelligences, aptitudes? What are the beliefs? How are we addressing these things without explicitly teaching it, such as we would with a formal curriculum? So as a specific example, I have included my school over here on the left, Cecil Elementary, and I have included our school's mission and vision. I'm not going to read the mission and vision, but as you can see on the right side, one of the activities we were tasked with was creating our own idea of mission and vision for a school in which we are doing. So how are we going to push our students? Well, the mission and vision, some things like you can see a nurturing environment, enrichment experiences. That's not necessarily part of the formal curriculum. These are things that are part of the hidden curriculum in which we still must address. these are going to help our students meet their goals. So I'm going to get a little bit more specific with how at my school, and of course, this will offer leadership implications for me, just comparing to what's already in place, of how the hidden curriculum is used. So we have a mantra or an acronym, Cecil Proud. You can see what each letter stands for. None of these are specific things that we necessarily teach our students. We may cover it at the beginning of the school year, and we do touch upon it as a teachable moment. But this is not part of the formal curriculum. This is not Eureka Math. This is not Wit and Wisdom. So, what does this mean as a leader? Well, first thing, again, we must make sure that our hidden curriculum here is promoting our school's mission and vision. As you can see, our mission and vision, we want to ensure the academic and social success of all students. These actions, as part of the hidden curriculum, are going to help students to meet those goals. We see that the hidden curriculum will hopefully impact the student's achievement. These actions in which we are sharing these values are going to promote academic behaviors that in turn will help our students meet their goals. And of course, the final implication, how are we going to make sure that these push our mission and vision? Well, as a leader, I must be sure to mindfully prepare these protocols, thinking of the hidden curriculum and what are the desired actions and outcomes, the desired actions that our hidden curriculum can push so that we can see the desired outcomes of a formal curriculum. The next section we're focusing on is the idea of personal changes that I have experienced as this course went on. So I'm going to look at the first thing through the null curriculum. Now, during the final week, we talked about the idea of gender and race, inclusion, and representation. I'm putting this within the null curriculum simply because I anticipate as a leader, a lot of these ideas, well, are very difficult. And some of the reactions in which teachers, constituents are going to see, that I would see, are that of just avoiding it, something we're not teaching as part of the null curriculum. So one of the biggest things that I took away as far as a personal change is how much I need to focus on inclusion and promote practices to increase inclusivity. We talked about gender and race, and we're going to talk a little bit more about those specifically on the following slide. But I'm also looking at this through the lens of the universal design for learning. When we focus on how can we be more inclusive for varying genders, how can we be more inclusive to students of different race, different religious beliefs? When we focus on that, all students can gain benefit from these. We can, as you'll see on the next slides, we can talk about other issues that may arise with gender and race as the backdrop. So just as a specific example of using inclusion within the null curriculum, we're focusing on including the LGBTQA community. Couple of things we do to make gender issues present. Well, before we're teaching something, we can read or experience different types of family dichotomies. Now, even though the focus, let's say Heather has two mommies, even though the focus of that, of course, is the idea of a blended family, or excuse me, a modern family, as we'll call it, of two women raising a child, we're making those differences less different. We're exposing students to it, but we can also look at it through other dichotomies. Even we want to be inclusive of perhaps students that have two mothers, two fathers, but it also opens the door and we can discuss ideas such as a blended family or a single parent. So in making these gender issues present, we're increasing the representation of the LGBTQA community, but we're also able to use the universal design of learning and it be inclusive across other types of families. So another example of being inclusive within the LGBTQA community, we can make curricular adjustments. Now, I'm not proposing that we alter the mathematics curriculum specifically to all students, but let's say going back to the example of, I believe it was Heather has two mommies. So we can target our students that may be in a situation such as that, and we can become a bit more inclusive with that. So just as a specific example of how my practice has changed and some of the implications that I've experienced. Louise's family went on vacation to Disney World, Sophia's family. So as you see in this problem, it doesn't specifically say what type of family, but as we go through the curriculum, we see that the traditional, as I'll call it, type of family is typically represented: mom, dad, and 2.5 children. Well, if we want to be inclusive, how can we adjust our practice? As a leader, how can I encourage my constituents, the people that I'm working for and with, how can I encourage them to be more inclusive? So we want to increase the amount of representation by being a bit more broad with the idea of what family is. It's okay to have that traditional family vernacular, but we want to be sensitive to variances in the family structure. So just like Heather has two mommies, something like Louise's mothers, Sophia's fathers. Again, thinking in terms of universal design of learning, Louise and her father went on vacation to Disney World. Maybe Louise has a single father. We can incorporate other aspects, Louise and her stepbrother. The sky's the limit, but by adjusting this, we are able to take the idea of the null curriculum, the things that people don't want to talk about that aren't necessarily included, and I've learned that we can modify this and be more inclusive. Another area with the null curriculum that I learned was just the idea of, with teaching, how can we be more poignant with what it is we are teaching and what we're not teaching, rather. You can see the explicit of what is taught. I gave the specific example, Module 6's decimals of Eureka Math, what I taught last year. These are the things that are taught to students. But as you can see on the right, well, there's a lot of things with decimals that we take for granted that students are not specifically taught, but these are life skills. So just a specific example, well, we're talking about money, adding and subtracting money. Well, what about budgeting? What about using a bank account or a checkbook? So we want students to be able to see and learn some of the things that aren't necessarily included within the curriculum. But as a leader, I want to make sure that I'm guiding staff, guiding constituents on that path to make sure they are including these in their planning. I also looked at some personal changes through the idea of the enacted curriculum. I'm looking at it through both the teaching and the leadership lens, as I had discussed earlier. So schools do have more autonomy than we thought to amend a curriculum, the delivery, things like that, as much to meet the needs of the students. Of course, we want to make sure that we are doing this based on data-driven decisions using the backwards design for data analysis. With leadership, the district, we do follow a standardized curriculum, as a lot of districts do, but we can have variations in our delivery. So as a leader, I want to make sure that we can encourage staff to look at their current level of autonomy. where do you see that something could be altered to meet the needs of your students? But it's very important that we are using data-based decisions. It's a great place for leaders to implement their data-based protocol within the enacted curriculum. One of the big takeaways that I wrote about was the idea of teaching within the enacted curriculum. We learned in the reading of Thornton that teachers actually have more power to shape the enacted curriculum than what we initially thought. One way that I discovered as I was going through an observation of a fellow colleague was in her measure of questioning. We know that in the idea of our curriculum, some of the questions are given, but we know that good teaching also requires additional measures to meet students' needs. So teachers hold autonomy to deliver this line of questioning. Some of the things that the enacted curriculum that I discovered was the idea of pre-planning questions. Before we're even teaching or before any misconception is brought out in class, we're thinking of what those misconceptions would be and how we can scaffold to make sure that we are giving students appropriate questions. Of course, focusing on doing things like implementing Bloom's taxonomy, Webb's depth of knowledge. We want to make sure that we have intentional student identification when answering questions. So when we're planning those questions, pinpointing specific students that we know might need a little bit of scaffold, making sure those lower tier questions are going to those students to ensure that they are part of the discussion, yet building at the same time. And it also, we want to offer opportunities for student discourse. It allows us to increase the participation and engagement while maintaining our lesson rigor. So the final aspect that we are tasked with is how, as a leader, will we deal with conflict? Because it's inevitable. So one of the big things is anticipation of conflicts. What the focus here will be the null and hidden curriculum. Now, it's possible, and it will happen, that formal curriculum, there may be conflict within that, but because null curriculum and the hidden curriculum, things like that are a bit more subjective and not as defined, this is where I anticipate a lot of conflict occurring. So as a leader, it's important that I discuss measures with staff to make sure that we are proactive and that we are dealing with this before anything can actually occur. As a measure to prevent. So one of the things I'm anticipating is that race and gender teaching, amending the curriculum for inclusion, that may come across to people with different beliefs, that there may be a conflict there. Of course, these are uncomfortable conversations, but we need to make sure that all stakeholders, that's leadership, that's staff, that's teachers, everybody that is part of the curriculum has representation. So as a leader, it's important to proactively develop avenues for students to gain additional learning experiences. Of course, we want to base these on student input. So things like clubs, sports, student government, fine arts, these are ways that we can support the formal curriculum, but we are going to engage in the hidden curriculum, the null curriculum, by making sure that students have representation, by making sure that students have a voice beyond just what's in the formal curriculum. So one of the points that's anticipated is the idea of differing beliefs I alluded to a little bit earlier, and how we're going to deal with conflict when it arises. The first thing, the biggest implication as a leader, is to maintain a professional and objective emphasis. This goes back to the idea of Bobbitt, focusing on our explicit outcomes. Even though there may be differing beliefs, the main thing is to focus on what the desired outcome is. How is that aligned to our mission and vision? How is it promoting the well-being of our school? Just a few things that can help with being proactive, making sure that staff is appropriately trained. Again, it's uncomfortable but necessary work. Some staff members simply don't touch upon, they push that into the null curriculum. What's not being taught, they're choosing not to teach it because they don't know how. So some of these sensitive topics, offering professional development is one avenue proactively that can be done. Engaging in professional learning communities is one of, if not the most important things that can be done when differing beliefs happen. A lot of times these beliefs are not going to be resolved. They're not going to, they're going to take time. So a professional learning community allows the learning and to be ongoing, and there can be a revisiting of previous ideas and uh, continued focus on the outcomes. It also ensures that the team's working together for a common cause and promotes collaboration. We want to make sure that we have safe zones or safe spaces, not just for our students, but of course as a staff. Things like daily meetings, advisories, giving choice. These are all ways in which we're going to build the representation and give students and staff a space for to feel safe within the learning environment. So the final takeaway are leadership implications. These are just some overarching ideas of my plan to manage change. You've heard me say it quite a few times, but I hearken back all the time to the idea of the school's mission and vision. It must align to and promote all aspects of the curriculum and curricular theories. We want to make sure that our mission and vision is promoting the hidden curriculum, those values that we're not necessarily teaching, but are going to help our students to meet success. We want to make sure that we have mindful planning of our protocols to enhance our inclusion, reaching more students, and again, through the universal design of learning will benefit the needs of all. Whatever we're doing, be it planning, be it a school-wide decision, we want to begin with an explicit outcome and design experiences to meet them. Finally, leaders, we must be objective on the promotion of our school's mission and vision. This includes all types of curriculum and theories. We all have our beliefs, but we need to make sure that we are continuing to keep the mission and vision at the forefront, and that everything we are doing is aligned to meeting that and the needs of our students. So I'm hoping that this was clear. I'm hoping that the things in which I learned, some of the big takeaways from the theories were presented throughout this. And I thank you so much. Have a good one.